Welcome back to the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilt Along. We're in the week of October 6th. This week we're going to be working on the wire dress form, Sit&Stitch, Quilt Shoppe, and a couple of flying geese. We went through the quilting files last week, but a quick recap in case you're just jumping in. You'll find files for this week's block under Section 2, number 11, Section 5, number 28, Section 4, number 21 and 24, and then Section 6, number 40. I have all my fabrics prepped and ready to go. I went through my selections last week. We're going to work through what I'm considering kind of easiest to most difficult. The wire dress form, this will fit in a 5x7 hoop. We're going to do this first. This is going to be embroidery because embellishments are added later. This will go the quickest. Then we'll work on the flying geese blocks. We'll do these in one hooping. Then we'll do the Sit&Stitch. It's Sit&Stitch a spell. It's a little couch and there's velveteen in this, and we're going to use a new stabilizer for this project. We'll do that third. And last we'll work on the Quilt Shoppe. The Quilt Shoppe has clear vinyl, Mylar, I think it might have some glitter vinyl in there, embroidery leather. There's a lot going on this block. So we'll spend a little bit of extra time with this one and we'll do this one last. For the wire dress form, I'm going to use a 5x7 hoop. I'm loading light mesh cutaway. This is one of the pieces of stabilizers that was cut off from another project. That's why I keep all my little extra pieces. I'm going to hand tighten, screwdriver tighten, and we'll head over to the machine. I'm on a baby lock meridian. My files are on USB. Let's go ahead and start with our wire dress form. I've got my quilting file right here. Go ahead and get that set. We're going to add our embroidery file. We've gone through these steps several times before during this quilt along. If you'd like to see it slower, go back to one of the earlier videos. What we're going to do today is the background quilting and the stitch out. All of the embellishments, like this one has a little tulle skirt and a little belt, those are all going to be added after we assemble our quilt. We'll step through the basics on this block since it's the first one for this video, and then blocks after this, I'll set it all to music. The first thing we're going to stitch is our batting placement line. Grab your batting, make sure to cover that placement line. I gave measurements for batting at the end of last week's video. Go ahead and stitch your batting tack down line. You want to trim away the excess batting. My batting's trimmed. Time to stitch the placement line. Place your background fabric. Make sure you cover that placement line, and then you'll stitch your fabric tack down. Once your fabric has tacked down, switch to whatever thread you're going to use for your background quilting. I'm going to use this glow-in-the-dark white. It does show up more like gray on the background, but we're going to be quilting a cobweb pattern. This will be perfect. My background quilting is done. I'm going to switch my thread to black and stitch out the wire dress form, and that's it for this block today. Our wire dress form is stitched. Let's do our flying geese blocks. Let's work on our flying geese blocks. There's a couple things that will be done differently with this block. The first thing we want to do is load the actual block and not the background quilting. That's because we're going to build our flying geese and get all the fabric pieces down, and then we're going to put our quilting on top of that. Going to go ahead and hit set, and I want to do both of these at once. I'm going to be using an 8x12 hoop to do this. I need to rotate this and move it and then duplicate it. Going to hit edit, rotate 90 degrees, and you can use these arrows here or you can pick it up and drop it. I'm going to slide it up so I have enough room to add another one. And I'm going to duplicate using this button, the border button. We talked about this in one of the earlier videos. If you duplicate using the mirror button, what it will do is work through this entire one first and then the second one. I want to do the same thing twice. So step 1, step 1, step 2, step 2. So I'm going to use this button. Up and down is correct. I'm going to drop it below. They're right on top of each other. We're going to be trimming. I need some space. So there's a button here with the arrows pointing out. I'm going to give myself some space and then center this a little bit. If I move them too far apart, it wants me to go to an even bigger hoop, so I'm not going all the way out. Let's add our quilting. I'm going to add the cobwebs first. They're not directional. It doesn't matter which direction you rotate it, how you rotate it, you just got to make it fit on top of your block. like that. And when you move this block, I'm going to use the arrows. It's really easy to center. I got it just like that, because all your little outlines lie on top of each other, so then it doesn't look like, let me show you. See, that's not centered. You can watch as the lines line up like that. So that's good. Here's where we need to think about what we're doing. We've got one block pointing this direction that goes toward our sewing machine, and one block pointing this direction that goes towards the E-coop on the bottom. For my flying geese, I picked a purple background and an orange background. My sewing machine block has an orange background, so I don't want the flying geese that goes here to be the orange one. I want that to be the purple one. So I need to keep that in mind. This one down here is going to be my orange background. So when I drop in my quilting, I need to remember that this block points this direction. So we're going to drop in the quilting for this one onto this block. On my screen, it's pointing that way. When it goes in the quilt, it's pointing that way. The quilting for the second flying geese is a directional pattern. It's the little pennants. This is the quilting. It matters which way I rotate it. I want to make sure I rotate it the right direction for the quilt. So when I look at this, if I rotate it this way, let me just bring it down. That looks correct on the screen, but I'm going to be doing this block right here. So I need to rotate it upside down on my screen, because when I put this in my quilt, it won't be pointing that way, it'll be pointing that way. And then I also need to remember to do my purple background on this one and my orange background on this one. I am going to save that to my machine. We're ready to get started. I made myself a little note. Purple top, orange bottom, so I don't forget what goes where. The piecing template is stitched, and I'm reading the instructions, and I realized as I was stitching these, this doesn't take into account adding our background quilting. Normally the background quilting is first, so we have our batting placement, batting tack down, trim the batting, fabric placement, fabric tack down, and do our quilting, but we're doing things kind of backwards. So since I have my piecing templates already stitched, I'm going to cover them with my batting, and I'm just going to restitch them. If you want, you can advance through using that needle minus plus, and you can do batting placement, batting tack down, trim it, then go through the fabric placement, fabric tack down, and quilting on this one, and then do batting placement, batting tack down, trim, go forward, and then start at your piecing template. Either way is going to work. If you've never had to back up your machine, needle minus plus. I'm going to use the up button here. This will advance per spool or per color, however you'd like to think about it. There's my bottom template. That should be my top template. It is. It shows the crosshair in the middle. That's the beginning of the design. I'm going to go ahead and restitch those. Let's stitch these templates out on top of our batting. That's what we need. Trim the extra batting that's outside of that outside line. I've got these trimmed. I'm hoping that's right. I'm hoping that this line here wasn't actually the trim line and that I went forward through everything correctly. If not, what's going to happen when we go to assemble this quilt is there'll be a little bit of batting in the seam. It won't be a big deal. I've done that before. You'll still be able to put together your quilt. I'll apologize in advance just in case the instructions are a little bit confusing about this because they're excluding background quilting. They're just showing making the embroidery portion. Let's go ahead and go forward with our block. As we're building these, they refer to this as Geese A, Geese B, and Geese C. This is my fabric that I picked for the purple one. I want to make sure I cover that triangle in its entirety. And then I need to place my fabric for my orange background block. I did put fusible on the back of everything just in case. Make sure I completely cover that triangle. We're going to stitch a trimming and placement line. It's going to stitch right here, and I'm just going to leave my neutral thread on my machine for this. We want to trim off this fabric on both of our blocks. We've got both of these trimmed. You want to grab your background fabric and place that right side down center it along that stitch line. You may have to kind of pick up your fabric to see where the stitching ends. It's a little bit hard to see. There's one. And you can tape these if you like. I'm sitting right here. I'm going to keep an eye on it. And I've got fusible over the edge here, so I need to be careful how I place this and make sure I place it correctly. And there's two. And then we're going to stitch the seam. We want to flip and press these. You can take it over to your ironing board and press it. You can finger press it, which is what I'm going to do. I have a little seam roller that I use a lot, but because there's no machine bed underneath this, I don't want to keep taking it off and on the machine. So I'm going to finger press it like that. I'm going to grab a piece of tape. I'm going to tape this down. And what I'm going to do is build both of my blocks, finger pressing all my seams. And then before we do our background quilting, I will take it to my ironing board and give it a good press. I've done that before. It works really well. One thing to keep in mind as you're building with two blocks in one hoop is to watch out for this. You see how this is kind of encroaching on the other block? Problem solved. And I'm going to add a piece of tape to hold this in place. And we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line on that side. Go ahead and trim off the extra fabric that's outside of that stitch line. I've got those trimmed. Don't worry so much about this being accurate here and here as the stitching ends, because we're going to do another piece and flip, and then we're going to be stitching a line across, so no worries on that. Grab your background fabrics, just like before, place it along that line, right sides together, and we're going to stitch the seam. So I need to make sure I get the right fabric on the right flying geese. Let's stitch our seam. We need to flip and press, and this time the orange fabric is invading the purple fabric's personal space. I need to do a little trim right here, and I don't have to worry about this being straight. We're going to trim our blocks at the end. Once that line has stitched, trim everything on top of that line. I've got this trimmed. One thing to watch for is sometimes you end up with a little peak. You can see there's a little bit of purple here. It's not going to matter for this one. I've got a black fabric here and I've got a green fabric here. This one trimmed off a little nicer, but if you've got a little point, which happens sometimes when I'm doing the Kimberbell flying geese method, I have to get my seam ripper and pick a couple stitches so I can pull that little point back and trim it off. You're going to grab your fabric B, right side down, center it along that line, and for my orange block, you can tape this if you like. I'm going to keep an eye on it. We're going to stitch the seam. We're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. Going to do the same thing. Trim everything that's outside that line. When you're trimming that line, you don't have to worry about the background fabric that's hanging over. It'll get caught later when we trim our blocks. Go ahead and line up your background fabric along that line, right side down. That one, this one, you can tape it if you want. And then we're going to stitch the seam. Same process as before. Trim the outside fabric. I've got that trimmed. Go ahead and place a piece of your background fabric right side down, center it along that line, and then we'll stitch the seam. Trim off your excess fabric along the top. Grab your fabric C, centered along that line, tape it if you like, and then we're going to stitch the seam. By now you know what to do. Before I do anything else, I'm going to take off any extra tape that's in my hoop. I'll flip this up, I'll trim the extra, flip that up, finger press it, and then I'm going to take my hoop off my machine and give this a good press with my iron. These are nice and pressed. The next thing that's going to stitch is a box that's going to go around the block. That is a trimming line. You'll see what we have here is a square. This is our batting placement. We've already done that. We're going to go through. That's your batting tack down. That's your fabric placement. Fabric tack down. Quilting. I'm going to quilt this block, and then when that's done, it's going to advance here, and I'm going to have to skip through those steps, the placement and the tack downs, to get to the quilting. I'm going to use this color. This is the glow-in-the-dark green color. These are both stitched out. Let's have a look at them. I want to share the pennant quilting with you. I'm not sure I'm too crazy about that. Love the spider web. That looks good. That's going to look really fun when we do the glow-in-the-dark. The pennant quilting, meh. Kind of ambivalent on this one. You've got 3 flags here. 1, 2 flags here, and then they kind of start to cross. This is nice. This is nice and full. Got a flag here and a flag here. This bottom one, though, there's only 3 flags here, and I know why, because they're not going to fit. I feel like this should have gone up a little bit, and this should have gone up a little bit, and this should have had more pennants on it. So if you don't like that quilting, pick another quilting. We're going to move on to the Sit&Stitch a spell block. We're going to be working with a couple of different materials on this one. I'm going to go ahead and load the files and do the background quilting to music. We've done this a number of times. You all know how to do that already. Let's add our embroidery block, and I'll show you my fabric and the thread I'm going to use for my background quilting. That's all you need for this one. My background fabric is this purple stripe, and for the background quilting I'm going to use the glow-in-the-dark green. I'll go up through the background quilting to music, and then we'll work on the block together. The background quilting has stitched. Love the way the green looks on purple. I'm going to switch to black thread. We're going to start building the couch. We're going to be working with flexi foam and velveteen and an iron away topping. I'm going to use black because all of the detail stitch around the couch is in black, and this should show up well on camera. The first thing we're going to stitch is the placement line for the flexi foam. Grab your flexi foam. You want to cover that placement line. I always like to tape the flexi foam, although sometimes I don't know if it really helps that much. It tends to move. This is very thick, so don't get up and walk away. If you don't have flexi foam, you can use Soft and Stable by Annie's product, or if you don't have that, you can double layer your batting and it'll give you that little lift. Let's stitch our tack down line. Remove your tape and trim everything that's outside your tack down. Once you have that trimmed, we're going to stitch a placement line. Next, we're going to work with the Velveteen. I guess you're supposed to cut this 7.5 by 3. I just grabbed it out of the embellishment kit. I'll just angle it near the top. It has a nap. If I brush it this way, it's rough. If I brush it this way, it's smooth. It says to line it up so when you brush down, it lays flat. It's a fake couch. Nobody's going to sit on it. It really doesn't matter. Put it down however you like. Make sure you cover your placement line. That looks good. And then we're going to stitch a tack down line. I will smooth it before I stitch that tack down line, but we're going to add detail stitching, so it probably doesn't matter. You want to trim everything outside the tack down line, and if you're like me and you didn't cut it, make sure to save this. We're over at the table. I've got this trimmed. I tried 2 different scissors. This is about as good as I can get it. It's just fuzzy. You might have to lint roll it. We're going to use some of this iron away topping. I'll make sure I have a link in the description box below. We need to cover our velveteen. I think I've used this once before. Let's see, there's a hole in this piece, so that's probably no good. I'm just going to cut that off, and then we're going to cover and tape in place. We're back at the machine. I just wanted to show this. We're going to stitch the couch detail in black. That's going to take some time. See how long this black section is? That's what we're going to do next. If you're not using black, make sure to change to whatever color thread you want for the detail of your couch. Put in a new bobbin. This is a lot of stitching. I went ahead and changed it out even though it wasn't ready yet. That way I don't have to worry about it running out while we're stitching. Let's stitch out our couch detail. Pausing here because I want to show this. See how it came up? I'm going to add a little piece of tape just to hold this so we can finish this part. Pausing again, this is really intense stitching. It's ripped away, the iron away that's here too. Now we're not going to be stitching over this, but I think we've got more detail here and here. At this point, I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to fuss with it. As I'm looking at the embroidery, there's either bobbin thread poking through or it's this iron away topping. I can't tell, but it does not look pretty. I'm not happy with the way this is stitching out. We'll get a good look at it at the end. Somebody came to the door and my bobbin ran out. I had a brand new bobbin, so you're going to need a couple bobbins for this one. Since I have it off the machine, let's look at this. That does not look good. I do not like that at all. You can kind of see that uniform all the way around. I'm hoping some of that's the iron away stabilizer. This just is not stitching out very well. Look at that. Something else I noticed, let's go look at the screen. I have to take this off the tripod and get it really close, but do you see those gaps in the stitching? And do you see how jagged everything kind of looks? That's exactly how it's stitched. Even up here you can see it's not a smooth stitch out. See the gap right there at the top on that scroll? That's exactly how it's stitching out. It's stitching out really messy. So I don't know if that is just my machine or if it's the file. If you're making this, let me know. Look at the words too. Do you see that? You see the gaps? I bet they stitch out just like that. Let's switch to whatever color you're going to use for the background tufting. I'm not going to put a new piece of this down. I'm just going to work with what I have. I'm going to use this gold color. Just cut a little bit of the tape. It says you can go ahead and tear away the excess topping and do that before we finish the rest of the embroidery. These are going to be the colors for my broom. I'm going to use this green for the broom handle and then the same gold I did on the tufting for the broom. That is one bright broom handle. I'm going to switch to the gold. It looks like it's got two colors of gold for the broom. It's got bristles and then a bristle detail. So check your instructions for that. I'm just going to stitch out both parts in this gold. If you're going to stitch out the little bit of detail in a different color, change your color and do that. I'm just going to stitch out in the same color. The next thing that's going to stitch is the little band on the broom. I'm going to do that in the green. The next thing we're going to stitch is the words sit and stitch a spell. They have this in black. I'm going to go ahead and stitch that out in black, and then we'll get a look at this block and we'll talk about how to remove the extra iron away topping. This is all stitched out. Let's get a good look at this block. See the legs? Now I've been stitching out some other things. I don't usually see this. Let me know if you've made this block, if this happened to you. I think it might just be the stitching. We did look at it close up on the machine and it did have gaps. At least I've got my bright green broom here to kind of distract it. I brought the instructions up on the Kimberbell website. I hope that shows okay. It says right here to remove, pull the excess topping away from the design. Then you're going to cover it with a pressing cloth. Gently press with a hot iron for 10 seconds. It doesn't say how hot, it just says hot iron. The remaining topping will transfer to the pressing cloth. So keep that in mind. If you have a real nice pressing cloth, don't use it for this. Grab a piece of scrap fabric, an old washcloth, or an old towel. I'm going to go do this off camera and then we'll come back and have a look at it. I used my iron to get rid of the iron away topping. Not really happy with the way the black stitching looks on this one. And I've got some poke through on the Velveteen. I got as close as I can. I used two different scissors for this. See that? And the thing is it's just on the couch part. If you look at the broom looks great. No problems there. If we look at the background quilting, all of the background quilting looks good. The words, they all stitched out just fine. So there's something going on with the stitching, I'm thinking just as it was programmed for the couch. Kind of disappointed. I know it's not a big deal, especially in the grand scheme of things of life. I would have liked it to look a little bit better. Thankfully, it's a Halloween quilt, so if anybody says, wow, look at that, I'll just say, well, you know, it's an antique couch. It's been bumped around a lot. It could use a coat of paint. Let's go ahead and move on to the Quilt Shoppe block. It does say the instructions are for an 8x12 hoop. My machine wants a bigger hoop for this, so I'm going to use my 9.5 by 14 inch hoop for this, and then I need my bigger piece of stabilizer, the 20 by 10, because the smaller stabilizer, 12 by 10, isn't quite wide enough for this hoop. We're going to work on the Quilt Shoppe next. This block has a lot going on. There's a lot of embellishments we're going to be working with. I'm going to go ahead and do the background quilting to music, and then we'll work on everything else for this block together. I'll show you what I've picked for my background quilting. I'm going to use one of the glow-in-the-dark threads. We're ready to go. I'm going to use the glow-in-the-dark white, and I've mentioned this before, this actually shows up as gray. My background fabric is this white with the polka dots, and that'll be linked below. You can still get this. Let's do our background quilting, and then we'll start building this block. Neutral thread on the machine. We're going to start with all of our steps for background quilting, and then we'll do the embroidery block together. We're going to start with our house placement line. I'm going to go ahead and do that in black, so I'll be able to see that. I'm using dark fabrics, and there will be detail stitching around it. The instructions do say to use a neutral thread. I'm going to put down our house fabric. Say goodbye to Mr. Jack-o'-lantern. So sad. Make sure you cover your placement line, and then you want to tack it down. Once it's tacked down, go ahead and trim everything outside the line. Same stuff we've been doing all along. Next is the placement line for the roof. This is my fabric for the roof. Want to make sure to completely cover the placement lines. Stitch your tack down and then trim. Next we're going to stitch the placement line for the dormers. It says to do that in black. I do have black on my machine. We're going to be using the black glitter vinyl for that. If you're not using the glitter vinyl, you can make it whatever color fabric you want. If you're using the glitter vinyl, you have to peel off the plastic that is on top before you use your vinyl. You want to take your glitter vinyl, make sure you completely cover those lines and tape it in place. I added a piece of tape up top, and here at the bottom, stitch out the tack down line for the dormers, and then trim away the extra vinyl. Once you've got this trimmed, you need to take this over to your ironing board, cover it with the pressing cloth, and heat set the vinyl. I've got these heat set. This is my window fabric. It's kind of a gold orange color, and there's going to be a satin outline. I don't like the way the orange looks on this, so I'm going to bring in a new color. I've got this nice golden yellow. It does have a little hint of orange to it. I think that will look really good. I'm going to use that for the placement line for the windows, and then when I do the satin stitching detail. I've got my new yellow orange color thread on the machine. Let's stitch out the windows placement line. Got to place our fabric to cover all three of these boxes. You could use scrap fabric for this too. You don't need one giant piece, although I cut my fabric ahead of time following the instructions. I'm going to tape that down. We're going to stitch tack down and then trim. Next is the door placement line. I'm going to use this fabric for the door. I'm going to switch to this green. I'm going to switch to black thread. We're going to stitch the sign post, and then after that, the placement line for the sign. It does have both of those steps marked in black. I've got the post and my placement line. The sign is in the embroidery leather. It's the white embroidery leather from the embellishment kit. I'm going to tape this in place, and then we're going to stitch the tack down line and trim. I've got that all trimmed. This trim's really nice. Going to leave the black on the machine, and we're going to stitch the scroll work across the top of the sign. The scroll work is stitched, again leaving the black on. We're going to stitch out the words "the" and "Quilt Shoppe." That's all stitched out. It does look like there are some jump threads in there. You have to be careful when you're cutting those. Next we're going to stitch out the words "candy corn." It's one of the oranges, so if you're following their coloring, make sure to check the instructions. I'm going to use the orange I've been using so far. Let's talk about this. Can you see the gray? It looks like it's almost outlined in gray. It's fine. It is what it is. Now, I was surprised as I went through the instructions. They didn't have us use the wash away topping over this embroidery leather. I think if you did that, you're not going to get this gray. This is the leather. The back side is soft, and if you look at this, it has a gray tinge to it. So whatever is holding this soft piece to the white leather is popping through the stitching and causing that gray to show. Luckily, it looks like an outline and it doesn't look bad. But if you want to avoid that, I would put the wash away topping over this before you stitch that out. Next is the little scroll. They have that in a different color orange. I'm leaving the same orange on. You can actually see the gray dots throughout the stitching too. Keep that in mind. Like I said, if you've got that wash away topping, put it over this if you don't want that embroidery leather to have that gray outline look to it. I switched to black thread. We're going to stitch the flower stems. I took a minute and trimmed some of the jump threads. There's one here that I'm leaving. It's really hard to get these jump threads without scratching this embroidery leather. Let's stitch out the stems. The stems have stitched. I'm going to switch to regular white. This is not a glow-in-the-dark white. It's a plain white thread. We're going to stitch placement lines for the Mylar. I've got my placement lines. It's really hard to see. It's white on white. You want to grab your Mylar. That's this stuff. It's very thin. It's iridescent. This is to cover those lines. It's actually easier to see the stitching when you lay down the Mylar. It has us putting the tape on the top and the bottom. Leave your white on the machine. It's going to stitch the inner candy corn flower fill. The little center part has stitched out. The next thing we're going to stitch is the middle part of the candy corn. I'm going to use my orange for that. And then the outer part, I'm going to use that yellow that I just opened and started using on the windows. I had to look up a picture of candy corn. I don't like it. I don't eat it, but I wanted to make sure I got my colors placed correctly. So switch to orange. If you're using two oranges, I think they use a dark orange and a light orange. Check the instructions. But I'm going to do orange and then yellow. I switched to black color thread. We're going to stitch the outline on the candy corn flowers. At this point, it says to remove the excess Mylar and then stitch the center fill. I'm going to stitch the center fill first. I kind of like the way the sparkly's looking, so I'm going to stitch the center fill, and then I'm going to take off my tape and remove the excess Mylar. I think if you do this carefully, you could trim, and you're going to have a big piece left that you can use for something else. Here's the extra Mylar from the space between the two flowers. You can just trim it, and then you can peel off the rest. I did have to get tweezers to get some of the Mylar out between the little candy corn petals on those flowers. The next thing we're stitching is the satin house outline. I'm using purple since I have a purple color for my house. Put on whatever color you want to look good with your house and stitch out that satin outline. The satin stitching is done. This looks nice and clean. I don't have any issues with this. I'm not sure what was going on with that couch block. Switching to yellow, we're going to do the outline for our windows. The satin stitching looks great right here on this one where I've got fabric and fabric. It's a little messy here with the glitter vinyl. The next step has us using the clear vinyl, which came in the embellishment kit. My clear vinyl, it's got like sticky stuff and some weird cloudy bits to it. You probably can't even see it on camera, but I can't get it clean. I'm going to forget about the vinyl. I'm just not going to use it. I am going to stitch the next part though. It's what you would use to tack down your vinyl, and I'll go ahead and stitch it in black. It's going to stitch the little window panes and then some detail. So if you want to use your vinyl, put it down, tape it, and then you'll stitch out just like I'm going to stitch out, and then you have to trim away the excess vinyl. Let's have a look at that and see how that came out without the vinyl. I think it looks fine. I don't think I'm missing anything at all by not having the vinyl. The next thing we're going to stitch are the window ledges. I'm going to use gray, but it's glow-in-the-dark gray. Here's the color I'll be using for that. Look how nice this looks. These all stitched almost flawlessly. Very happy with that. The next thing we're going to stitch is the porch railing, and then the door satin outline, and then a door window fill. Rather than go with the green for all these steps, the railing, the door satin outline, and then the window fill, I'm going to use the glow-in-the-dark white. It is going to look light gray. For some reason when it stitches out, it doesn't stitch out white. It ends up looking a little gray. I'm going to switch to my orange. It's going to do the pinwheel fill on the door. Next we're going to stitch the foundation of the house. I'm going to go back to the gray glow-in-the-dark for that. Apparently I forgot to film that. The next thing we're going to stitch out are the little fence posts that are on the roof. I'm going to switch to black for that. We've got two more things to stitch out. I'm going back to the glow-in-the-dark gray. We're going to stitch the roof satin outline. We are on the last part of the stitch out. I'll be using my purple for this. This is going to be the detail on top of the dormers, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the embellishments for this before we move on to trimming our blocks. Everything is stitched out. Let's have a look at it. I don't know about you, but I feel like I just ran a mile or something. This was a really, really involved block. We've got our nice little sign up here. I do really like the way the Mylar came out. It gave it a little bit of sparkle. I did think about trying that on the windows, but it tears away so easily. I figured one bump or rolling it up or folding it to store it between holiday seasons, it was going to rip off. Looking good. See how nice all this stitching looks? This looks great. No problem with any of this stitching. I really think there was something going on with that couch block. Everything looks good. I don't feel like I've lost anything by not using the vinyl. There's going to be more that goes on this. Let me show you the embellishments and then we will trim our blocks. My printout is so bad, I brought in my computer to go through the instructions today. We're going to add quite a few things to this block. There's a little banner here that gets tied on and it goes across to another part of the quilt. This fabric bolts and back quarter sail, this is done on the embroidery leather. There's instructions for this further on in the booklet. We'll be making and attaching these little fabric bolts, and then you can see there's a button. So even though right now the window does look big and empty, we're going to put on this sign. You can see it covers part of the window, and then you've got your little fabric bolts. You could even pull this down further if you want to cover up more of your window. Let's go ahead and trim our blocks. I'll give you the size for each block and then trim it. We've worked with regular rulers and orange pop rulers. After that, I'm going to go over fabric selections and the rest of the schedule. There's probably going to be an adjustment to make it easier for us to get it done and not be so rushed at the end. This quilt is very heavy on the embellishments, and there's a lot of embellishments we actually have to make. So as I'm looking toward our deadline, trying to get this done in time for Halloween so we can enjoy it, I think it'll be helpful to move a couple of things around. Your wire dress form is going to trim to 4.5 by 6.5. If you've got the orange pop rulers, you can use those. I've gone over this. Quick word as always, all the way over to the left. Watch your fingers. Our flying geese blocks also cut to 4.5 by 6.5. Your sit and stitch block is going to trim to 6.5 by 8.5. Your quilt shop block is going to trim to 8.5 by 10.5. That's the biggest of the rectangle rulers in the orange pop set. Next week we're working on large pinwheels. There's 3 of these, small pinwheels, 3 of these, section 1 border blocks, section 2 border blocks. I'm going to pull fabrics for those and I'll show you what I select. And what I'm looking at as we get to the bottom here, October 20th, that's the starting date of the week. For this week, if all we do are these border blocks, it's just background quilting. The video is going to be about 5 minutes long, and then that leaves a lot of work for this last week. So we'll do the border blocks and we'll assemble. And then the very last week, we'll stitch out the borders, sew those on to the top, and then we'll work on all the embellishments together because we actually have to create some of these embellishments. Here's something I did to help me pick my fabrics for the next set of blocks, the pinwheel blocks and the border blocks. I printed out this picture. This came from the background quilting bundle. If you don't have the background quilting bundle, feel free to take a screen grab of that. You can see how all the blocks are numbered. My handwriting's not the best. This is to help me. All of the fabric selections and fabric cut sizes are in the instructions, but I went through and I wrote them all down in one spot so I can pull all my fabrics and I'm not like paging through the instructions. I don't have the cut sizes here for the pinwheels, that's pretty easy, but I went through the border blocks and I made a note of the numbers. So if you look at the picture, these are the numbers I'm referring to. See, there's a number 3. These are border blocks 4, 9, 10. I went through and marked all the border blocks. For border block 3, let's step through this one. This will help you select and cut your fabric. Border block 3 is actually made up of 6 different little squares of fabric. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can do it just like this. You can pick 6 random scrappy fabrics, however you want to make it. These are 2.5-inch squares. So when I made my note for border block 3, I wrote 6 total 2.5-inch squares. That's what I need to make border block 3. And then I went through the instructions and wrote down all of the sizes for each. And I also made a note. Border blocks 12, 33, and 39, they used the mustard velveteen. I'm not using that again. I really don't like the way it came out. I'm going to use regular fabric for that. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to go pull all my fabrics and then come back and show you what I've picked. I'm going to show you what I picked. Before I do that, I thought I would show you this. This is something that might help you if you're working from your own fabrics. I went through and made a note. I realize it's so sloppy you may not be able to read it, but I wrote things like, this is white cobwebs, this is the dot background, white polka dot. So as I was pulling, here's one of the items I had to pull, one of the large pinwheels. I knew I had a white polka dot background here, white with cobwebs, white polka dot, so I didn't want to pull any more white. I wanted to go a little bit darker because this is already white, these are all white. So that helped me decide which colors I wanted where. I did go ahead and trim and get all of my border blocks ready. At least I think I got all of them ready. If I miss one, we'll find out. If you pull your background quilting sheet and go through, you can find wherever it says border block, and you can find all the background quilting. I'm just pointing them out really quick. Under section 3, section 4, section 5, also section 5, and under section 6. All of these are going to have background quilting but not applique, so I'm going to try no fusible on anything. And we'll find out when we do our first background quilting if that's a good idea or not. I'm a long arm quilter, so I regularly quilt things that don't have fusible on the back. An embroidery machine is almost like a mini long arm machine. So I don't think for these pieced blocks, the pinwheels and the border blocks, we're going to need fusible. For my large pinwheels, number 2, number 19, and number 34, and what I did was make a note. 2, top left, here's your measurements. All of these are going to trim to 4.5 inches square. For my batting, I cut 5.5 inches square. We're still going to be doing the background quilting method, so I want to make sure that I have enough batting ready for these. We're making 3 small pinwheels. It's number 29, 30, and 31. They're going to go together like this. These two are going to be the same, and then I made one in the middle that's different. I'm using my charm squares for these, and because I starched my fabrics, I didn't have a full 5-inch square to work with because starching shrinks your fabric. We're going to sew them together in a row. The blocks, 2.5-inch square each. Together we're going to end up with a row, 2.5 by 6.5. Cut your batting, 3.5 by 7.5. I have my section 1 and 2 border blocks all together in here. Let's go through those. I made myself a note what it looks like and where it goes. This is block number 3, top row. You need 6 2.5-inch squares, so I have 3 orange stripe and 3 black. We'll be sewing them all together. When sewn together, it's 4.5 by 6.5. Cut your batting, 5.5 by 7.5. Block number 4 is in the top row, 4.5 by 8.5, so my batting is 5.5 by 9.5. These are blocks 9 and 10. 9 is a 2.5-inch square. 10 is 2.5 by 6.5. We'll be sewing them like this. When sewn together, we get 2.5 by 8.5. Your batting should be 3.5. That should say 9.5. Good thing I'm going over these. Here's a piece from my scrap pile. That'll work. Now I know it's big enough. Those are blocks 9 and 10. Block 12 is made up of 3 2.5-inch squares. When they're sewn together, 2.5 by 6.5. Cut your batting, 3.5 by 7.5. Those are all the blocks we're going to do next week. The week after, we're going to work on section 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. I'll go ahead and show this to you. That way, if you want to get ready ahead of time, you can. I've got 3 blocks in section 3 and 4. Block number 16, 2.5 by 6.5, so my batting is about 3.5 by 7.5. We've got block 20, made myself a note again, bottom left corner, right of the bookcase, 2.5 by 4.5, so my batting is 3.5 by 5.5. Block 22 is 2 2.5-inch squares, so you end up with 2.5 by 4.5. Batting 3.5 by 5.5. I made myself a note how I want this to go into the quilt. Green here, orange here, and that has to do with what's laying around it on either side. Section 5 and 6, we've got block 33. It's a 2.5-inch square. This is one of the ones that they're using the Velveteen. I'm not doing any more Velveteen. I kind of had it with the Velveteen, so make sure you check the instructions if you want to do the Velveteen. Block 36 is 2.5 by 4.5, batting approximately 3.5 by 5.5. You can see it's just a little bit bigger than my block, which is just fine. It just needs to be a little bit bigger. 39, 2.5-inch squares. It'll end up 2.5 by 4.5. Cut your batting, 3.5 by 5.5. Let's look at all our blocks one last time, and then we'll review the schedule for next week. Wire dress form. You've got the 2 flying geese, my funky old couch that didn't stitch out quite right, and we've got our Quilt Shoppe block. Make sure you come back next week, October 13th. We're going to work on the 3 large pinwheels, the 3 small pinwheels, and then we'll quilt out the section 1 and 2 border blocks. Thank you for joining me this week for the Candy Corn Quilt Shop Quilts Along. Make sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, laugh at my funky couch. I hope this is helping you get your quilt done in time for Halloween. Thank you again. I'll see you next time.